All right, another special edition of the Robert Scott Bell Show, heard through Natural News Radio, 3 to 5 in the afternoon every day, Eastern Coast time, Monday through Friday at least. And we'll be joined by the Health Ranger, Mike Adams, momentarily to say thank you. We've got so much gratitude to the federal government and the USDA for saving the family farmer in America. Wait a second. I think I read that wrong. Mike Adams, they didn't save the farmer. They're destroying the American farm by the escape now we're hearing of GMO wheat.
Yeah, everything that we warned about, Robert, is coming true. All right, we warned that these genetically modified experiments, these GMO open field experiments, would go awry, that the GMOs would escape and they would then cause genetic pollution to infest and infect the other farms and thereby compromise the entire U.S. food supply. And it's happening. The USDA came out just 2 days ago and said they found genetically modified wheat growing in a field in Oregon, and this is the same strain that Monsanto was given permission to plant experimentally from 1998 to 2005. And Monsanto planted that strain in 16 states across the United States. So it has now escaped. This is proven. This is admitted by the USDA. The very next day, Japan announced that it was canceling a huge contract order for U.S. wheat. And it was doing so precisely because Japanese consumers don't want to eat GMOs. And if this is contaminating the wheat supply, Japan doesn't want it. And the same is true throughout most of Asia and nearly all of Europe. So now we are going to see U.S. wheat supplies being rejected globally because of this contamination caused by Monsanto and approved by the USDA.
Well, unless anybody thinks this is great news for America, because maybe now, suddenly we've got cheap wheat available for all Americans. Well, great. We're going to be hopped up on even more genetically modified organisms. There's no applause there, or should not be. And even if the wheat was designed or designated for animal feed in some cases, those people in Asia, they know better. They don't want to eat animals that are eating this crap.
Well, the real issue here is not just, as you mentioned, the short-term impact would be a flood of wheat in the U.S. market because no one else wants it. So wheat prices would drop in the United States, making contaminated wheat products more affordable to Americans. But basically, it's almost like, in terms of the globe, it's the Americans that are dumpster diving for the low-grade toxic wheat that nobody else will eat.
Right. We used to export that to what they call the third world, that which we didn't do. That's what happened with the vaccines that were laced and loaded with the thimerosal. And once they said, no more here, even though we know there's still trace amounts of mercury in them, they sent them to other countries. But now I guess this is almost like a food karmic loop, because what we wouldn't want to eat now, we're being, okay, you can't afford anything, the economy's bad. Hey, here's some GMO wheat no one else wants, cheap food, cheap bread. Do you really want it? This is a disaster on all levels, and including the destruction of whatever's left of farming, especially, and even the corporate farms are going to be hurt by this.
Yeah, it's huge. You're absolutely right about that. The United States has become the dumping ground for food that wouldn't even be approved as dog food in Japan. You can't even buy this and make it into dog food, but the American people are going to be eating it unknowingly because the government continues to oppose honest GMO labeling of their food. So think about it. America, the dumping ground of all the toxic food that nobody else in the world wants because it's contaminated with GMOs. But you mentioned something very important. The U.S. farmers are going to be devastated by this. So if the price for wheat plummets, which is, there are signs it's already happening because of this, it means that U.S. farmers are going to be, many of them, pushed to the edge of bankruptcy or even pushed out of business because they can't pay this year's overhead. And farming is a cash flow crunch business.
Yes.
You have one bad season of bad prices in your history. Now, farmers will often buy contracts, put contracts on commodities that they're growing in order to alleviate that risk so they get paid off in terms of an investment vehicle if their crop doesn't bring in the money it's supposed to. The smart farmers do that, but a lot of farmers don't do that, so they have full exposure to this. And this was a big unknown. Nobody knew the USDA was going to have this shock finding of GMOs in the wheat. So what this really means is that a lot of wheat farmers are going to go out of business, meaning that the next year there are going to be fewer farmers in business to plant wheat, causing a shortage and a price increase. So, in the long term, this is going to cause a price increase at the same time that it is ruining the reputation for U.S. wheat exports around the world.
Yes, and we just got word, too, that not only Japan, but now South Korea suspending imports of U.S. wheat as well as of today, Friday.
Wow.
So this is only growing and expanding. And, the Americans are, holding the GMO wheat bag looking like dunderheads. I mean, how intelligent are we that we would allow our government to, just kind of unleash this monster that the rest of the world would see through and reject? And listen, it's leading to our own demise. And it wasn't like this is new, because remember the farmers that had sued Monsanto all those years ago because of the genetic drift that ended up in their farms. They wanted nothing to do with it. They sued Monsanto. No, Monsanto sued them for stealing their GMO technology.
No, there should be a class action lawsuit against Monsanto by every farmer that is economically harmed by the drop in wheat prices because of this contamination. Look, this is Monsanto causing genetic pollution. This is like BP spilling oil in the Gulf. It's Monsanto spilling their genes all over the wheat farms of America, and the corn farms for that matter as well, and potentially many other crops like alfalfa. This is genetic pollution. And we have got to stop protecting the polluters, the big corporations like Monsanto. We've got to hold them responsible and stop the pollution. The big promise of Monsanto and even the USDA to some extent was that these GMOs are going to help farmers increase yields and feed the world. Well, guess what? Reality didn't turn out quite that way. It's ruining farmers, and it's polluting the world. That's the reality of what's happening.
Well, as of earlier on May 31st, when we're going on with this, it looks like Monsanto's stock has dropped about 4.12%. Interestingly enough, for those that are into the economic realm of the impact of this. I don't know, this is not going to put Monsanto out of business. We wish it would at this point, but there are so many, again, repercussions that if there was a legitimate war to declare, a constitutional one, I might add, would be to declare war on Monsanto for destroying so much that is good about America as the breadbasket of the world, now contaminating to the degree that we're rejected by the world.
And this could be an ongoing issue. We don't know how long this genetic pollution will continue to replicate and contaminate the commercial farm fields. It's important for people listening to understand genetically modified wheat has never been approved for commercialization by the USDA. No farmer knowingly planted genetically modified wheat. What the USDA found is wheat that contaminated the fields accidentally, which means it's replicating, it's spreading. How do you put that genie back in the bottle?
Right.
You don't. You don't, because it crossbreeds with the other crops that are already out there, corn, wheat, whatever. I mean, each strain breeds with its own strain. A GMO variety will cross with a non-GMO variety, contaminating the non-GMO variety, and then it continues to replicate. So this may be something that actually compromises the integrity of the U.S. agricultural industry for decades, Robert.
Yes, and even if they stop today, that's still true. That's
right.
And we know they're not going to stop today because there's still too much power and control over those in Washington, D.C., which raises another big issue that, if you don't mind, Mike, I want to ask you about, because we've had some folks in Washington, D.C. that we respect that are doing a lot to roll back or attempting to roll back the power of the central federal government. And on the GMO labeling issue, they seem to have gotten it wrong. That includes Rand Paul, Ted Cruz, maybe Justin Amash, things like that. And initially, we were very upset by this, but there were some nuances to their explanation. I wanted to go through that, if you don't mind revealing.
Yeah, well, sure. Rand Paul and Ted Cruz voted against an amendment that stated in its description that it was to allow states to pass their own GMO labeling laws. But, I wrote a story about, or an analysis of Rand Paul's explanation of why he voted it down. Rand Paul and Ted Cruz are both in favor of full transparency for consumers. They're champions of liberty. And they believe that we have to approach this from a different angle. They want the same result that we do, full transparency of what we're eating, but they don't think that giving more power potentially to the FDA, which is what that amendment could have done, is the best way to achieve it. So they're not opposed to GMO labeling, and I'm glad you brought that up so we could clarify that.
Yeah, and it's an important distinction because neither of us have ever been in favor of giving the FDA one iota of more power because they've abused every bit of power that they've been given. Even though we would argue in many ways what they do is completely unconstitutional. I mean, they run a police state, and that police state is impacting negatively on our freedoms to know, in fact, what's in our food, much less what the USDA has admitted here with this drift out that wasn't even approved.
Yeah, you're right. And in fact, one of the biggest stories that has never gone big, it's a big underground story that needs to go public is, everybody's up in arms about the IRS targeting Tea Party groups and conservative groups.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the FTC and the FDA have been doing worse than that against natural product companies for at least a decade, worse than the IRS scandals.
Yes, and in fact, yes, anybody that makes any implied claim that a substance that is of nature, a food, a supplement, can actually prevent, cure, treat, mitigate any disease, that it becomes automatically a new drug. And in fact, more recently, there was a like a Facebook magician, a Facebook magic wand, because if your company had a site that has supplements and somebody said a testimonial and you as a company liked what was said, there was the magic. Suddenly now you've got a new drug and the FDA's coming after you.
Yeah.
Incredible.
Yeah, exactly right. The FTC, people don't know this, the FTC will show up and they will raid your company, and they will force you to sign a so-called consent decree, which is a document that has you admitting to crimes you never committed and having to pay out all this money to surprise inspections and all these amazing things. And the FDA has similar tactics, but together the FDA and the FTC are a criminal mob that is far worse than the IRS.
Yeah, so we come back to the decentralization, the urgent need for everybody to protect the integrity of the seeds, to grow food however they can, to protect it from the genetic drift, which is becoming increasingly difficult, but to stop looking for solutions in the same place that created the problem, facilitated the problem, and even utilizes the police state power to maintain the consistency of the problem.
Yeah, we're facing a lot of big problems here, and government obviously is not the solution because government helped create these problems. It was USDA that approved these genetic trials that Monsanto planted, which resulted in the escaping wheat strains. So a government is going to protect corporate interests because we live under a system that technically should be defined as fascism. It's corporations really controlling the government, which has all the power centralized in its own hands. This is a dangerous situation. And that's why so many of us, all the grassroots supporters who marched against Monsanto, the people from both sides of the aisle politically or even apolitical people, we all believe in taking power away from the fascist corporate government system and putting the power back into the hands of the people who deserve honest food and deserve to know what they're eating and deserve to not have their farm fields infested by toxic genetic pollution put out there by corporations. The government has gone too far. Monsanto has gone too far, and they've ruined it now. They've ruined our wheat crop. Okay, it's done.
Yeah. Well, if there is some good news, maybe they've ruined their, let's say, golden boy interaction with government, as more and more people probably from within government are now going to be so outraged. If they had never thought of speaking out against Monsanto, they might now have the courage to do so.
Well, yeah, now farmers are going to feel the losses in their own pocketbooks, and they're going to say, wait a minute, why am I getting only half as much money for my wheat? And those questions are going to go up the chain. A lot of farmers aren't even aware of GMOs, by the way. They have no idea what this is.
Yeah.
But those questions are going to be pushed up to the USDA, and the USDA is going to, heads are going to roll. Say, wait a minute, we screwed up. We polluted our own agricultural sector.
Yeah.
We ruined our industry.
Incredible. Well, we urge you all to tell your friends to keep plugging into the news at Natural News, listening to the Robert Scott Bell Show Monday through Friday on Natural News Radio. You can plug in the archives. We've got them linked up in the show notes at robertscottbell.com, including a great interview this week with Vernon Hershberger, who showed a lot of moxie, in fact, in his victory against the state there to be able to sell raw milk within the buying club, the cow share program there.
Yeah. Kudos to Hershberger. Great victory. Proves that you don't need a license to milk a cow and sell the milk.
Yes, we teach you here to stop asking for permission where none is required. And when it comes to your freedom, it's never required. Thank you, Mike Adams. Thank you to everybody for being here on the Robert Scott Bell Show. We'll keep you plugged in, and stay tuned. Lots more healing to go.
The Robert Scott Bell Show.